Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As you know, I have talked about my entire story as an attractions cast member in the Land of Tomorrow, and told all my crazy guest interactions from all three of my attractions. You probably even know that I also talked about what it was like working all three of my attractions, which were Star Tours, Autopia, and the Monorail. Well, if you didn't, there's a card that probably just popped up for those interested in listening to the other podcast episodes or whatever. This episode will be the last in the arc and will be covering what my time was like being a lead, aka supervisor of the monorail. Now, just for some context, I was one of the leads at the monorail from October 2022 to March of 2023. Obviously not a super long time, but this period was also important to my story as it marked the beginning of the end of my journey as an attractions cast member, and I will get into that as the episode goes on. I'm going to make the assumption that you have already listened to the previous episode on working the monorail, as this one will not be covering any of that. This will be solely focused on leading at the attraction and all the responsibilities that come with it. I will also talk about what it was like getting into that position, as well as unfortunately losing my status as the lead, and the toxic aftermath that followed with it. As always, this video will have chapters in the description or on the video itself for those who want to skip around, as some of this is somewhat repeated information from my first cast member video. Also, this is a podcast and only somewhat related b-roll footage will be on the screen, as it's meant for listening purposes. So if you want to put this on the YouTube Music app or whatever, then you can do so as well. Alright, cool. With all that out of the way and assuming you're caught up, this is part 2 of my time at the monorail. Working up to leadership. There are two types of leaders at any of the attractions. There are your trainers who teach you how to work the attraction, and then there are your leads who make sure the attraction's operations are running smoothly. I will only be focusing on the lead aspect, as I unfortunately never got to be a trainer at any of my attractions. Not that I'm bummed out about it, but business needs thrusted me into a leadership role. Each attraction normally has 3 leads during the day, one to open, one to be the mid, and one to be the closer. The mids always interact with both the opening and closing lead, while the opening and closing lead technically never interact, unless it's one of those short hours sort of day, like when the park's only from open to 8 to 6 or something like that, for like special events or whatever. Yeah, other than that, some attractions may also have more than 3 leads, like Space Mountain, but the monorail only had 3 leads, and that's what I'm talking about in this episode, so yeah. Anyway, they usually open up applications for these positions roughly every few months, but sometimes it was very few and far between for certain attractions. Well, I tried for trainer at Autopia and didn't get it because the manager didn't see me thriving there apparently. I wasn't really there that much post-pandemic, to be honest, so I then tried for Star Tours trainer, and the manager told me that she would rather have me at another attraction, but she said I knew my stuff. Then I interviewed for trainer at the monorail, not thinking I would get anything there because it's a third attraction. Well, to my surprise, me saying I was okay with either lead or trainer ended up landing me a lead position at the attraction. While it was good news, I wasn't really too happy about it because it was one of those feelings where you didn't really feel like you deserved it, especially how a few of my coworkers apparently talked to management about me being on the list. I'm not saying I was the model cast member, but I did engage in a few goofs and gaffes from time to time, but I was very aware of my audience and did it once in a blue moon. It wasn't like it was every minute I'm pulling pranks or whatever, but once or twice a week at most. It was like making a prank phone call or something. It wasn't like saying anything outlandishly crazy because we're at work, you can't say that kind of stuff. Not that I would anyway, but nonetheless, I got my training set ready and it was 2 days of opening and 2 days of closing. Basically 1 day to shadow a lead and 1 day for a lead to shadow you. My first day of training was off to a great start with the fact that the block light at the Tomorrowland station wasn't working, and we couldn't continue until it was fixed, as it's very crucial to our operations. Well, we had to deviate for the day and basically make radio calls and hand signals to indicate to the driver that they could dispatch from the station. This also led to the headache of telling the driver when they were actually aligned with the station, but I'm not going to get into all that nitty-gritty details here. I ended up actually skipping my lunch that day because of the issue, and I'm going to get into breaks and lunches in a bit. The rest of that day went much smoother, and I learned more about the operations and writing the end of shift report and other things. The next day, I was pretty much in charge, and the same issue with the block line happened again. I made the executive decision to just get it fixed while we continued our morning checklist instead of bringing everything to a complete halt. Luckily, the block light was fixed, but it was the color of the Downtown Disney Station's block light instead of the Tomorrowland one. So basically it's normally like a bluish silver on the Tomorrowland side, while the downtown one is like usually like a greenish color. And just a fun fact, it's actually still like that as of writing this, and probably even recording this. So if you see that little like stop go block light at the Tomorrowland station, you'll notice that it's a green color, and that was actually my call because I said, who cares what color it is as long as it works. My third day of training was the first night of closing, and the attraction was down for pretty much most of my shift as there was lightning in the area, and outdoor attractions can't operate with said conditions. So pretty easy day. The fourth and final day was also pretty cakewalk, as nothing out of the ordinary really happened and we had a very smooth closing. I was signed off that night, and I was pretty stoked to start my first shift on my own. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the responsibilities of a monorail lead in a bit more detail and some other things. Lead responsibilities. While the lead pretty much oversees making sure the attraction runs smoothly, they are also just a paid babysitter. For an extra $1.75 an hour while working as the lead, especially when I was the lead, you are in charge of making sure your coworkers are doing exactly what they need to do, as well as making sure everyone's getting their breaks, lunches, and clockouts on time. While the monorail doesn't have assigned positions, we were in charge of assigning our own breaks and lunches in the computer system, whereas the attractions with positions would just auto-assign your breaks and lunches via the computer system by having someone bump you out of your position, or you get after finishing a rotation. It became somewhat of a headache as some would take longer than their assigned breaks and delay other people's breaks, so that was always fun to deal with. On top of the babysitter duties, we were also assigned doing an audit for the attraction for our shift, making sure everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing and doing it correctly, giving any coaching or feedback when needed. If anyone did fail an audit, this is where a manager would step in and have a talk with them about their work performances. I could tell you for the most part, everyone normally did their job correctly, it's just that some didn't do it efficiently, and that's another can of worms. I normally pass everyone with the occasional undocumented feedback, meaning I passed them but I still talk to them. I believe I really only reported one coworker for unsafe operations, but that's just because I caught him on his phone multiple times while operating the trains and getting numerous amounts of e-stops for going too fast in the zones he wasn't supposed to be going too fast in. You can probably guess the gist of the job. So we'll move on to both the opening lead responsibilities and the closing lead responsibilities. There's also a mid lead, but they don't really have to worry about the same things that the other two leads do, unless the attraction didn't open for the day when they clocked in, or they had to close the attraction for the day, but those were very rare circumstances that maybe I'll get into later in this episode, or probably not. Starting off with the opening lead. They clock in about 15 minutes prior to the train opening customers. They go backstage and head into the Tomorrowland office where they retrieve things for the days. These things are usually the keys of the attractions, 2 mobile phones for each of the stations, and possibly any checklists or other miscellaneous things for the attraction, depending on what's going on for the day. On top of all of that, they also do a quick greeting with the opening manager, who usually is there before them. Most of the time it's just a hello, but sometimes there is like a, oh hey, do this for the attraction or do that today. You know, just simple stuff. After getting all the supplies, they head into the Tomorrowland station and unlock the radio cabinet for themselves and the rest of the crew coming in throughout the day. There's supposed to be 20 radios, and they're all on a charging base, so they aren't just sitting in there dead. Besides that, they start to work on the break sheet and seeing the general staffing for the day. You know, seeing who called out, who's showing up late, or who got pulled from or to their attraction for the day. I'm not going to get into too much detail about the computer system they use for their operations, but just know that this is the system where everyone clocks in from, as well as the leads and managers can make day of adjustments for everything. Everything as in clocking in or out times, early release or extensions, and even changing pay rates if someone were to do a lead or trainer function for a small part of their shift. For example, giving a newer cast member to the attraction their day 4 test, which is something leads or trainers can do at any of the attractions. The most important thing they do before doing anything is call the monorail shop and make sure the trains are ready. Most of the time it's a simple yes, but sometimes only one of the 2 trains is ready or both are not ready for normal operations. We'll just go with the assumption that everything is smooth on the monorail shop's end, and we'll do business as usual for this chapter. Anyway, as they are working on the break sheet and such, they're also managing the station and answering any calls and such, while the Tomorrowland opener is doing their checklist as they have to wander around the Tomorrowland station. They also keep note of when the train requested clearance to back up out of the shop, and when they finally made it to the beam. Leads also to keep track of when the train is put away, regardless if it's for the day or for a few hours. Other than all that fun stuff, they also make sure the attraction opens on time and calls the correct people, letting them know if and when they are open, or ready to open and such. Monorail is a little complicated because it's a early entry attraction, so they do have to open a smidge earlier than the rest of the park does. Now let's go ahead and move over to the closing lead. They have pretty much an easier job if we aren't counting the mid lead, who practically does nothing. The closing lead starts one-way trips roughly 30 minutes before park closing and starts to slowly cycle out the attraction until the park's actual closing. They also make sure the trains in each of the stations have a closing checklist. Now, some nights were longer than others, but most of the time the trains were put away, roughly 20 to 30 minutes after park closing. So basically, you can catch the last train out of the park when the park does close, but anything after that, you're out of luck. So, just an FYI. After all the cast members return to the station, the lead tells them to clock out wherever, and the lead goes and writes their end of shift report. I mean, every lead does this before they clock out, but the only difference is with the closing lead is they email an Excel sheet that is the gist of everything that went down for the attraction for the day, as well as a summary of what the leads experienced. Basically, this is the time the trains were put away, or this is what happened, like this train had a malfunction, but we were able to recover it after like 15 minutes. Stuff like that. Just to give you an idea, the less they wrote, the better for the day. There were some days though that I wrote at least 3 paragraphs worth of stuff, but I'll get into that in a bit. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about when crap hits the fan and how the lead has to play 4D chess when the attraction breaks down or something stupid like that. I can tell you, aside from how many times I was personally towed in a train from last episode, I had a train get towed at least 15 times, if not more, when I was the working lead of the attraction. In my first month or 2 alone, it felt like I had a train get towed every time I was the working lead for the day, which were most of these tow numbers come from, at least half of them came from the first month of me being a lead. So yeah, fun stuff. Technical difficulties. Aside from the heat-related downtimes, the monorail does have some fun technical difficulties. Fun is in quotation marks, by the way. I experienced both of these as a cast member and as a working lead numerous amounts of times. They range from the beam losing power to the train losing 2 of its 4 motors, and don't even get me started about when the air brakes failed when the train came into the station. That happened on my 3rd day on my own, by the way. Sweet. Giving you just a quick rundown, whenever any attraction experiences a downtime, we have to call 3 different people or departments. Obviously letting the lead manager know, but they'll probably find out through the park ride radio calls if the lead is not present. Then there is also the maintenance base, so they can come fix the issue if it's relevant to that situation, but you still have to call them anyway, just letting you know that they're down. Lastly, there is the central communications department, which oversees all the wait times and other miscellaneous stuff, and they do that so they can mark the attraction as temporarily closed. Most of the time a regular cast member can do these things, but sometimes the lead just handles it if they're at the attraction, if the breakdown happened while they were there. And when I say that, regular cast members can handle these things, it means just calling these departments and not actually putting anything into the computer. A lead can do that on the computer if they really wanted to, so just FYI, I guess. After calling all these things in, the lead now has a new job, which is juggling multiple things at once. First of all, they have to find out where the trains are at and if there are any guests aboard. If they're at the stations, then it's easy peasy, but you can guess if they're out on the attraction or out on the beam, it becomes a bit more urgent. They also have to figure out where all their cast members are at and find out breaks, lunches, and clockouts. Breaks aren't really super important, but lunches are a problem because if you hit that 5th hour thing that California labor laws have, it becomes kind of an issue. But you can look that up on your own, as I'm not going to get into my state's labor laws in this video. Clockouts are also important, as you don't want to give someone overtime, and someone might have a clockout, have to clock out by their 5th hour or their 6th hour, depending on what lunch waivers they signed and what shift they were working. To add on another bucket of fun, you're communicating with the manager, as they're probably at the station by now, and they're making a bunch of phone calls to their manager and other miscellaneous people, all while you're figuring out your staff. Now, sometimes the managers don't show up, so that would lead to another fun thing of dealing with phone calls you'll be getting, as well as worrying about your staff and the guests at or on your attraction. This all depends on the severity of the downtime, but your average power outage isn't going to really raise any red flags, as they're normally restored within 10 minutes. Normally restored within 10 minutes. I've had a few where it was longer than 10 minutes, and you've probably heard that story in my guest video, in my monorail video. Yeah. There are also acts of nature downtimes, and this was one of the strangest downtimes I've ever experienced. You may recall on the news or social media that it was snowing at Disneyland back in March of 2023. Well, that snow is actually called Gruppel, which is just the transition from snow to ice. Basically, it's soft ice. Anyway, the beam didn't like that idea and actually short-circuited the beam for a good few days. I had to give out some overtime and get one of the 2 trains towed because it was not able to make it back to the monorail shop before the earlier thunderstorms. We also had to shut down the attraction for the day because I could tell you for a fact that that beam was not coming back online after whatever damage this Gruppel did. So that's one of those scenarios where the mid-lead ends up becoming the closing lead. Fun stuff. Yeah, the power outages on the beam were sort of crazy, and still probably are sort of crazy. Now, just to defend Disney a little bit here, I mean not entirely, but I will defend them here a little bit. The monorail beam is from 1959 and hasn't really been replaced since then, aside from minor adjustments here and there. I can also tell you that there's another can of worms and another headache with the monorail beam, because a lot of the engineers who worked on the monorail have retired or are dead, so, and from what I've heard, it's not really easy to make adjustments to, especially with the beam's intrusion system. Which, I remember there was this one day where the beam's intrusion system failed above the Autopia attraction and kept giving intrusion reds in that area. An intrusion red means the beam tells the train that there's another train within one zone of them and will automatically emergency stop the train so it can't go any further. Just in this case, there was no train as we only had one train on the main line that day, so basically it was getting a phantom intrusion red with just one train. So yeah, that was a fun day. The reason I bring this up is because I had to escort 2 of the monorail shop cast members onto that attraction so they can replace one of the nodes that resides in one of the pillars on the Autopia attraction. Normally, the Autopia lead would do this, but since I had Autopia knowledge, I could escort them, and it was awkward because we had to shut down their entire attraction for a good 10 minutes while they fixed this issue. Oh yeah, it was also dark, and the issue technically didn't actually get fixed because they were using whatever parts they had, since the maintenance budget is so piss poor with this massive conglomerate of a company. I sort of touched on that in my unfortunate downfall of Disney parks video if any of you are interested in watching that. I could keep going on and on about the numerous amounts of technical issues I dealt with as a lead, but this episode would go longer than I want to have it at, and I haven't even talked about what it was like leading from my perspective. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and move over to that right now. The fun times of starting out. So these next few chapters will be a little bit on the longer side than the rest of the others in this episode, and they'll be a little bit more on the personal side, basically talking about what it was like for me specifically as a working lead and the aftermath that follows it. Now, I'm not going into super nitty-gritty details, and also any names used are fake names, so please don't harass anyone at this attraction, let alone at the resort, about my time as a lead or as a normal cast member. Yeah, some people that I used to work with do know who I am, and they know about these videos, but I just want to make it clear on my end. Most of the people that I did have issues with, mentioned in this video, either don't work at the park anymore, or are no longer employed by the company, at least from my understanding. Thank you, and let's go ahead and get this next section of the video started. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start my time as the lead. To be honest, after getting signed off, I didn't actually get any scheduled shifts. Keep in mind, I was on the list of new leads, and I believe I was the second one signed off. There was a mass training of both leads and trainers at the attraction during this time because we desperately needed both. I believe it was about 2 weeks after getting signed off when I got my first solo shift because one of the leads for the night called out and they pulled me into basically covering for them. Well, of course, I was happy to lead on my own for the first time, and I will admit that I was a bit nervous. I mean, who wouldn't be? The only upside is my first day on my own was a closing shift where it's just make sure everything gets put away for the night. It was actually fairly smooth shift, and I had the manager of the theme park actually visit the attraction. They ended up riding in the tail cone, which was on the train that had a door issue going on. It was the orange train, and it's always had these issues with opening and closing the door on the tail cone, even before I got signed off before the pandemic. So that was a fun time because I was at the opposite station when he showed up. They didn't even know it was my first day, and they just came to ride the monorail, I guess. I also quickly explained to him about the issues with the tail cone, and we pretty much red clipped it, which means do not load or operate. Just a quick side tangent, we were not loading the nose or tail for safety reasons at the time, but I believe they are loading them now as of writing this, but it's first come first serve and subject to availability. If you ever see like a D&L, like D and L, like the letters, above the door buttons on the nose or tail cone, it means they are not loading them for guests, but we can still use them as cast. Not that we really went into the tail cone, but we did use it from time to time to transport the rain mats from the downtown Disney station. That's why it does kind of smell musky in there, especially after a rainstorm. Now, the nose and tail cone are going to become a thing later in this episode, and you'll find out why later in this chapter or possibly the next one. I don't really remember what I wrote. Anyway, the rest of the night was fairly smooth and I didn't really have any issues. I did doubt myself a lot and never really thought I was doing anything right, even up until my last day as a lead. It wasn't the pressure of leadership, but it felt like now I had a target on my back, and some of you may know that feeling if you ever been like in a leadership position. The reason that I wanted to be a lead at this attraction was because, you know, I was always at it, and I wanted to make sure everything was running smoothly, as I saw how my original home attraction was doing and it really bummed me out. My original home attraction being Autopia, and I went into that in the other video. I'm not saying I was like a dictator tyrant lead and telling my coworkers to stay in line, but basically just do what they're told, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page, as, you know, we're here to do a job and make sure we're there for the guest. I know it's a crazy concept, right? After my first night, I started to get pulled into more shifts and started to get scheduled more shifts on the regular. I was normally the mid lead, but sometimes I would close, and I only opened like 3 times because I didn't like waking up stupid early, so I usually traded my morning shifts with someone who did like morning shifts. Another thing is that more of the cast started to know that I was the lead, and I started to gain the respect of the veteran cast on the morning side. Honestly, I should have just stayed on the morning side and the mid side, as the night crew were where all the bad eggs were mainly. I was mostly the closing lead during my first 3 months, as I usually traded for them or I was just scheduled it. Even when I wasn't working as the lead, my normal scheduled shift was like a 4:15 to 12:45 or like a 4:45 to like 1:15. something in like that ballpark, as I wanted to work nights so I can spend more time with my daughter. I started to gain my confidence back, especially during my lead shifts, and felt happy at my attraction again. Honestly, if I didn't get laid, I probably would have quit much sooner than I did. If only I knew the ugly side of being in a leadership role, or at least paid attention to my fellow coworkers who did lose their status before me. Not at the monorail specifically, but other attractions. Now, I would say I was a cooler lead, that I wasn't super strict. My only request was to make sure we get the trains out on time and we all went to our breaks on time. I was always at the attraction and only really took my 30-minute lunch when I worked my shift. Not saying we couldn't take our 15-minute breaks, but we normally just marked them as taken so we could leave easier and not have to worry about clocking in or out for those sorts of things. There were even some days where we had to work through our lunch and basically have 30 minutes of unpaid time. These were always conveniently when the attraction had issues, so we had to be present, and the managers would also not be around to help. Even if they were, they would low-key get mad at us for not being at the attraction when things hit the fan, but at the same time, to always call them when we needed a break, especially when it came to our lunch, because they didn't want to have to pay that lunch waiver fee or whatever for the 5th hour, but I'm not going to get into that here. Which, oh yeah, by the way, the one time I did call them to take my lunch, they said they were unable to come to my attraction because Space Mountain broke down for the 20th time that day, and the Space Mountain kids needed help. Yeah, they needed help, alright. I believe the only time I worked through my lunch for something not attraction related was to talk to a coworker because another one of my coworkers was saying toxic crap about her and such. Yeah, some of you may recall Susan from my first cast member episode that I did way back in January. Well, just to let you know, Susan was also a lead up at the monorail, and she is fake nice. The type of person who acts nice, but is very toxic behind your back. Anyway, I don't even know what toxic crap she said to my coworker, but it caused this whole ordeal where I had to skip my lunch to patch up whatever things were said. Basically, Susan was saying that I was saying nasty things about this other coworker. This other coworker that I talked to, let's just call her Monica, she was both a lead and core trainer over at Autopia, and honestly I did have a lot of respect for her. She helped me out a ton when I first learned that attraction, and basically after learning that attraction, and she was one of the few leads that I did look up to a lot. So the fact that Susan would say these whatever she said about that was just insulting. Like, I would never say anything like that, especially to Susan. Yeah, she get ready for hearing that name a lot because yeah. After talking things over, we concluded that they were just rumors and it was stupid because we both knew we had respect for each other. We basically now had trust with one another, and that's something one of my core leads taught me on the monorail, was to have like the 5 people you trust at work. Monica was actually added to that 5 after this whole ordeal. It's just stupid that we're, dealing with high school drama at a goddamn theme park. That sigh was scripted, by the way. Obviously this part's not scripted, but that sigh was in my script. There was also another instance where I heard a rumor about a friend of mine, but I won't be sharing that story because, 1, it wasn't true, and I don't want to cause him any more headache about it, especially since this person still works at the attraction. But don't worry about that. Aside from all this drama and such, I had my hands full with working a lot of overtime and getting more lead shifts, as I guess I was one of the more available leads at the attraction. While my schedule was wide open, I did try to have weekends off so I didn't have to make the grandparents watch my infant daughter. Unfortunately, I can remember more times working weekends as a lead than having them off. You might even recall that I was working a ton of overtime even before I was a lead at this attraction in the previous episodes, and that was more so as the lead as well. I can tell you that I put too much in this attraction for a terrible return. The thick of it. Well, let's just go ahead and rip this band-aid right off and get into the thick of it, shall we? Aside from all the technical issues I mentioned earlier, we also had the issue of staffing. The night side had terrible staffing a vast majority of the time. I would try to ER people when I could, but thanks to a handful of bad eggs, I couldn't really do much unless I wanted more on my plate. So basically, if I let someone go home, that means I have to do more work. Which, sometimes I didn't mind, but whatever. Well, there was this one guy in particular that I started to despise working with. We'll go ahead and call him Frankie. Frankie had a lot of rumors about him, and honestly, I didn't care to believe any of them because I only care about your work performance. The only thing I saw Frankie do was clock in super late, take super long breaks and lunches, and get a ton of e-stops because they weren't paying attention due to phone use. To give you an idea, we cannot use our cell phones at all when working attractions, and it's a fireable offense, especially in a safety position, which every position at the monorail is a safety position. Well, I've known I mentioned it before, but we didn't really have the best staffing due to the high turnover rate in the land, and the monorail wasn't exactly getting new hires every week or so like the other attractions were. So some stuff was getting slid under the rug from management. I didn't exactly catch Frankie texting while driving, but I could make my assumptions because he wouldn't get those issues when I was in the nose cone with him or any of the other leads. Hell, even some of my other coworkers that rode with him never saw him get any of those issues. It was only when Frankie was alone. Then one day, I caught him because we could see him clear as day over the lagoon. I saw it, and I can tell you, a ton of guests saw it too. Yeah, that was the final straw in my opinion, and I reported him to management for unsafe operations and delaying operations. Frankie did end up getting called in for his walkout, but my report was the icing on the cake. Most people were getting fired for attendance, but that's what actually got him, by the way, was attendance. I did have to walk him up to the manager's office, and one of his friends didn't like the fact that I got him fired. I know a lot of people liked Frankie, but don't shift the blame on a lead for doing their job. I started to hear rumors about myself about changing as the lead and not being the fun guy I used to be. Well, that's what happens when you get into a leadership position, unfortunately. Now, I will admit that, yeah, I did have a few goofs and gaffes as the lead, even when I wasn't the lead. Sometimes I would prank call the other station and ask them if their trains were running, and if they said yes, I would tell them to go catch them. And yeah, sometimes I would leave the train reverse for an unsuspecting driver to get reversed on. And to be fair, per our operating guide, you're supposed to make sure the train's in forward before going. I also lastly admit that sometimes we all like to do cowboy accents on the radio when doing our calls because it's funny as hell. I don't know why I did that accent. That's not a cowboy accent. Anyway, I did get talked to a manager about my horseplay aside from the cowboy accents, and I came clean that yes, I was doing those things and they would stop ASAP. The manager wanted me to tell her who exactly was doing these things, but I didn't want to narc on them, especially because one of them was a trainer that not a lot of people liked because he was quote-unquote weird. Nonetheless, I made it a point to talk to everyone at the attraction and let them know that the consequences of horseplay would result in consequences. Obviously, I do regret being a fool and trying to be funny, but as a leader, you shouldn't be doing things like that. Honestly, that is my regret, and I will admit it here before I get into why I lost my lead status. Just to spoil it, no, I didn't lose it for those reasons, as my conversation with the manager this time was a undocumented coaching, meaning I wasn't in trouble, but next time not so much, basically a slap on the wrist. It was the next few actions that made some of the managers not really like me. Granted, I wasn't kissing their butt before, but after my chat with the lead manager, I made sure I started to run the monorail like a tight ship. No more funny business. I was starting to take things way more seriously and started, shutting down my emotions off from those who weren't in my super close friend group. I'm not saying I was a robot, but most of the time I'm a pretty serious guy if I'm not super close to you, but I would still try to be as outgoing as I could be even when I wasn't working with those not in my immediate friend circle. I was helping new cast members at the attraction, I was getting to know everyone at the attraction a bit more, and I was even making sure we were getting the attraction running in an efficient and timely manner. I was even put in charge of the efficiency at the attraction, where I came up with a bit more work, but it would make things easier for everyone. Basically, I was testing out a system where we would group guests per cabin based off round trips or not at the Tomorrowland station. Yeah, surprise, surprise, not a lot of people like doing extra work on the night side because courtesy and efficiency is inconvenient for my lazy coworkers. On top of all that, I also did overstep my boundaries with the managers a bit, and it was involving an unsafe condition. I was getting pushed back to keep a train operational even though the last cabin on the red train was listing away from the station. Basically, I was told just to not load that cabin specifically, and I just overstepped my position and told my coworkers to just pull that train off. I might have messed up the numbers for the managers that night, but I wasn't going to deal with an unsafe train. No, just granted it was a low tire pressure and just needed some air, so the train was going to be in and out within 30 minutes at most. I'd rather have a safe operation and not have that on my conscience, even though the managers gave me the approval to keep it operational. Now, just keep this in mind. Do not go and harass the management team, as the managers who were involved in this incident apparently aren't working in the land anymore or are not with the company anymore. That is according to some of my friends who still work there. On top of that, this was a past issue, and I would hope it's not going on right now. Oh yeah, you remember Susan? Yeah, she has a lot of friends at the monorail that were part of her bench team. I'm saying bench in replacement of the B word because bench sounds funnier. Anyway, one of her two friends decided to load the nose cone with her friends when I was not at the attraction for a moment. Well, to my surprise, not only did somebody record them coming into the station, but I also saw it with my own eyes as I was back for my quick thing that I had to do. Well, I guess Susan always loads her friends and family up in the nose cone, so it's okay if her friend does it. Yeah, I knew that was gonna come back and bite me in the ass later. It didn't really help that I would also load the nose and tail cone when we were on the final train of the night to fit any stragglers that wouldn't fit in the train. This was a small handful of times, by the way, and I always made sure the driver was okay with it. I would also only do it when we had one train in operation for the night, and never with two because it's a 15-minute wait with one train and a 5-minute wait with two. Also, technically I wasn't breaking any rules with the D&L magnet as it's technically not a red tag. The working lead or stage manager has the final say and having it open too. Yes, I did go against the manager saying, but it was an unspoken rule that we couldn't load it for daily operations, but nothing said anything about closing operations. I also told the guests no pictures or video while in motion. I can tell you, I probably did this like 4 or 5 times tops, and everybody respected it. Now, I never did this during normal operations, but I guess me getting upset with Susan's friend really caused a ripple effect. Not that I yelled at her, but I was just like, just don't do that again, okay? I don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want you getting in trouble. Honestly, I thought it was a stupid rule, and a few of my coworkers agreed, especially since the AC was working up there despite what management said. Now, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was either send the train around one more time with a possible extension for those closing both that train and the downtown station, and to be honest, managers probably would have just let me have 1 or 2 people right up front as opposed to making the labor budget bigger, which was a huge deal when I was the lead because of budget cuts. Oh yeah, labor budgets are how many hours the attraction has allotted for that day. For example, I believe the monorail had like 110-ish hours of labor for everyone working that day. Normally we'd have scheduled about 120 hours of labor, and letting some people go home earlier would get it down to the actual budget. Being at or lower than that number would always make the attraction look good, as they use these labor budgets to determine staffing for the next year. It's also important that the attraction is running smoothly, and not a lot of people are standing around, so it doesn't look like we're wasting these precious labor budget of the little budget we had for the day. Despite all that stuff that I mentioned, I was enjoying my time as the lead. I would say I had smooth shifts most of the time. My labor budget was usually close to what it needed to be, and most of the staff enjoyed working with me. When we had to work, we made sure we got it done. I remember it was Halloween of 2022, and we transported at least 650 guests every hour for a good 3 to 4 hours at the downtown Disney station alone, according to the turnstile numbers. Just to give you an idea, we normally have under 100 during normal operations and barely scrape 300 during peak hours at that station when it's not a holiday. I was also able to deal with the unexpected early closures during the rainstorms in December 2022 and January of 2023, really having to rework breaks, lunches, and off times with a moment's notice because management decided last minute to close the park earlier due to low attendance. Yeah, it's not because the park is flooding, but because the cast members outnumbered the guests 4-1. It was normally an hour early, but it was sort of inconvenient because they wanted us to go home early, but we would lose out on our scheduled hours because of this. I'm not gonna go into that, but yeah. The beginning of the end. As the chapter title implies, and me spoiling it throughout the entire video and even in previous videos, we are now approaching the end as my time as a lead. It was also the point where I felt like things were starting to go too well for me. I know it's a sad way of looking at life, and I'm not expecting any sympathy, but I just got too comfortable at the end of the day, and that's all. I remember the moment that sort of kicked it off too. I wasn't the lead during this shift, but I remember coming into the downtown station a little too fast, and I was distracted by some dumb guest messing with one of the emergency comms in their cabin. So I overshot, and I forgot to put the train back into forward as I was getting out of the train. Because, I went to go fix the comms in the cabin because, I don't know, I was just having an off day, I guess. Well, after going down to their cabin and fixing the emergency comms and getting into the next position, the driver got in and went backwards, and that's when I was just like, yeah, I screwed up. While I did know this person well, I wasn't trying to do it intentionally, and I don't believe they told me, but they did call me a little frustrated at the other station, which led to someone who saw it being forced into writing a statement about me. About a week later, on a non-lead overtime day, I was called in by one of the nicer managers, and he buttered me up first. He was being super nice and was wondering my aspects within the company, and he even talked about Star Tours as I applied to be a lead or a trainer over there, where after buttering me up for 10 minutes, he shifted topics to getting a written strike on my work record. It was for behavior and not attendance like most people get. To start things off, the first thing that was brought up was the accusations of putting the train in reverse, and I thought it was about the previous week. I tried to explain myself about that, and he didn't even know about that incident, but it was for the times that I did do the reverse prank even before I was the lead. I'm not going to deny it, and I did explain that it was something we all used to do, and then he told me to rat out the other people that were doing it, but I'm like, I'm not gonna narc on people for something that I did so long ago, and they did so long ago. Like, we were all on the same page that we weren't doing it anymore. The second thing, which was the one that upset me the most, was the accusation that I was cussing out my coworkers and yelling at them and calling them derogatory names as well as racial slurs. This one is completely untrue, as I would never call anybody a racial slur, let alone yell at anybody. I have respect for my coworkers and I treat everyone as an equal. I also don't say cuss words in my personal life. Like, the most I have said in my videos is like ass or damn or some other PG cuss words you can think of. Everything else is actually a censor bleep, as I'm really just saying freak or shoot, but I edit it so it sounds like the bad boy counterpart. The last thing was loading the nose and tail cone. Yeah, I wasn't going to beat around the bush with this one, and I was truthful about it and I told him the situation, but thanks to the unwritten rule, this was the official reason I lost my status. Poor judgment. It was just stupid because I was not the only lead doing this, but of course, I didn't want to rat out my other coworkers because I didn't want to be a narc and shift the blame to others. I felt like I got the wind knocked out of me, and this written strike I had on my record wouldn't drop off for 12 months. And it really halted everything I could do within the company. Just to give you an idea, if you ever got one of these, you can't do anything. You can't transfer lands, you can't learn new attractions, you can't become a leader or a trainer obviously, and you can't transfer departments. So any potential jobs that I applied for were pretty much denied after this point. Any future that I had with this company was gone because not only was I a big stupid idiot, but because a few bad eggs didn't like me. It could have been rigged from the start, but it sucks that I stepped up into a leadership role to do better for my family. I wanted to move up within the company regardless if I was at the parks or not. I wanted to do something with my useless bachelor's degree and get something better than driving the monorail around all day. Now, I'll be honest with those of you listening, this was probably a blessing in disguise. It was something that needed to happen for me to finally get the motivation to leave this toxic relationship with my job. I worked too much to get to where I got, and was taken down within an instant without a warning. Yeah, I'm not gonna say I was the hero in the story, but I'm not willing to go down without a fight. But let's get back to the rest of that day after losing my status. Walking back to the monorail station that night, I just felt empty. I wanted to go home and I really didn't want to be at work anymore. Just my luck though, because we were short-staffed and I actually got extended to close the train as a few people called out. So that was neat. I then actually talked to one of the other leads who was working as a regular cast member that day, and I let her know to be careful because I didn't want them losing their status, as they were doing the same exact thing as me, which was loading the nose and tail cone on deadheads. Well, this person that I talked to was Susan. I didn't despise her yet, but I wanted to be nice and warn the other leads who were doing this. I also talked to the core lead who was closing that night and let them know the situation. They were another lead that I really looked up to and pretty much upset about me losing my status, and they didn't even know they were going to take it from me. She at least let me close the first train that night, but little did I know things were only going to change for the worst. You know, life has a really fun way of kicking you while you're down and truly making you laugh about it. Well, I ended up getting shifted to the second train last minute, and it was fine, whatever. I didn't really care that much. What's an extra 15 minutes gonna really do, right? Well, you may recall last episode about me talking about getting stuck in the train for 2 hours. Yeah, that was the same night I lost my lead status. I got stuck in the blue monorail for 2.5 hours because one of the wheels came loose mere inches away from the shop's roof, as well as blew the power to the beam. Double whammy style, baby. I was stuck in the train with Monica, as well as another coworker who was really acquaintances with me, but we weren't really, super close. But she wasn't out to get me either because she was just there to make a paycheck like we all are, aren't we? I ended up telling them what happened and they were pissed off for me. It just made the icing on the cake that we were all stuck in this stupid train while the shop team kept calling us the wrong colored train and telling me to move even though the train can't move without power. Yeah, it was sure a night. I was worried that I would get in more trouble for breaking the train in retaliation for losing my status, but luckily the closing manager that night wasn't informed of me losing my status and was actually one of the few managers I actually respected. To move this story along, we ended up getting the train to move after 2.5 hours. They were going to get the Disneyland Fire Department to evacuate us, but we were in a weird spot and they actually had to call the Anaheim Fire Department to get us out. Well, the moment that the Anaheim Fire Department finally showed up is when the beam magically turned back on and we were able to slowly scoot back into the roundhouse, or the monorail shop. Yeah, AFD wasn't too happy about that, but I also wasn't too happy about clocking out at 3:30 in the morning when I was originally supposed to be off at 11:15, then got extended to hard close at 1:15, and then all that happened. Here's another scripted sigh. I ended up giving my shifts away for the weekend and just took the weekend to really process everything and just stay away from that place for a bit. I think the best part was the fact that I was supposed to be the closing lead the next 2 nights, but since I didn't have lead permissions anymore, those shifts went unfilled, and the opening and mid lead had to stay longer than they wanted to because no one could fill those shifts. Oh well, not my problem. The toxic aftermath. After my weekend away, I was given a morning shift at Autopia, and then I actually went to go talk to the core lead at the monorail for the morning side before my shift was actually starting, because he was actually up in the Tomorrowland offices before I clocked in. I had a long conversation about my mistakes, me losing my status, and I asked for advice on what to do now. She was the type of person that's really blunt and told me straight. She basically told me to switch to morning so she could keep an eye on me, as well as sending a message to those who reported me that I wasn't going to be, defeated by this. So for the next few months, I was exclusively morning shifts. I started to work all 3 of my attractions a bit more since who cares, right? Whatever, I just might as well be everywhere. I ended up having a meeting before the end of April with the main manager that basically put the order in to get my status removed. I wanted to make it clear to her that I will own up to my mistakes, but I didn't want the note to say that I was a yelling racist piece of crap because that wasn't true at all. She said the main reason I lost my status was because of the nose and tail cone thing. She then also said that she would have actually given me my status back if not for the fact that I bullied another lead about losing their status if they weren't careful. Yeah, remember Susan? I guess she sobbed to the managers that I threatened to report her for doing the same thing I did, which wasn't true at all. On top of that, Only the 2 core leads and Susan knew of me losing my status before all of this. So I was frustrated with this chick, but I was willing to be the bigger man and apologize for whatever the hell I did. This was after I was back from my week vacation because my daughter was turning 1, and that was more important than this job that kicked me while I was down. I started down the path of trying to get the wording changed in the operating guide so other leads wouldn't get in trouble for my mistakes. I wanted to basically have it say that the DNL magnets were practically the equivalent of a red tag, but only for guests and not for cast members. Yeah, that was hard denied, but I still think it should be more than one sentence buried deep in the operating guide that basically states that it's up to the working lead or stage manager's discretion. No mention of the DNL magnets, by the way. It's probably still like that, but I digress. I basically worked for a few months, and with the monorail going under refurbishment, my seniority at Autopia and Star Tours went into effect. I was basically getting the early morning shifts at both attractions, and it really jacked up my sleep schedule. To give you an idea, my morning shifts at the monorail were normally like 9 or 10 in the morning, whereas the other 2 attractions were as early as freaking 5:30 in the morning, or as late as 7:15 in the morning. Little did I know another blessing in disguise came my way, but it wasn't exactly job related directly. My wife was offered a full-time position at her job, and that pretty much paid double what I made, so I dropped down to part-time weekends only aside from Friday nights. This is also why I started to truly hate my job. Now, when I say I hate my job, I still loved coming in, but it didn't have the same spark as it did before. Now that I was back on nights, it was the same dummies that got me into this mess in the first place. Oh yeah, remember Susan? I guess she was complaining about how she's getting all these lead shifts because more than 3 leads quit or lost their status after me. Like, you dumb bitch. I figured the only reason she was one of those people who outed me so she could actually get more lead shifts, as I had way higher seniority than her, even when I did eventually go back down to part-time. I didn't feel bad though. Then she made a mistake that really scared the crap out of her and made her basically avoid me until I left the company later that year. So we're just going to go ahead and rewind a bit back to when I was, gone for a week to celebrate my daughter's first birthday. I guess the week after I came back, Susan decided to start a rumor about me that was basically a direct attack on my family. The only reason I found out about this was because another one of my coworkers asked me if I knew about it. Obviously no, but I was beyond pissed and I was furious about it. Why the hell would I do something like that to my wife, especially when I just got married to her at the time and I had a kid with her? I've been with my wife for over 14 years as of writing this and married for almost 2, so just to give you an idea. It was assumed that I left during this week to hide any evidence or get together or something like that, even though I was with my family the entire time. First of all, I don't actively talk about my family at work because of situations like this. I just show up, do my job, and get a paycheck. Yeah, I might have been a casual conversation with some people that I'm more friendly with, but it was usually about like video games or anime or something like that. Most people were actually surprised that I had a wife and a kid when I did bring it up, like naturally in conversation. Also, secondly, you already won. You don't need to kick me while I'm down, and bringing someone else into this is beyond messed up. I was beyond furious, but now I was stuck behind a rock in a hard place because it would be seen as retaliation if I reported her for this nasty rumor she had spread. I figured since this rumor was very personal, I immediately spoke with HR and attempted to speak with any manager that same day. This was also fun because the person that I talked to in the Tomorrowland office to, talk to a manager, also let Susan know that I was upset with a lead spreading rumors about me and possibly other people, because I know a lot of people stopped working at the monorail solely because of Susan. Well, I ended up talking to a manager after I clocked out and basically name dropped everyone that was involved. The following day after talking with the management team, Susan basically was ducking out and trying to avoid me every chance she got. She knew she struck a chord with me, and I honestly was shocked that she didn't get fired for the crap she pulled. She knew I was pissed, and even my coworkers were weirded out that she would dip out of the station whenever I showed up. I'm not one to actively show emotions either, and innocent people don't run away from people, She seriously struck a nerve. Look, mess with me all you want. Fine, I don't care. I have thick skin. You already messed with my job, so that's cool, but you don't go after people's family. That's a low blow, even for her, and I'm glad she knew that she effed around and found out. It was so bad that I came into the park a few weeks later with my wife and kid, and she was trying to hide from me in a safety position. Like, do you want to tell that lie to my wife and my infant daughter? Do ya? My wife actually wanted to have a chat with her, like, you know, just like, hey, this is who I am. I know you know my husband, sort of thing. But I'm like, it's not worth it at the end of the day. You know, I probably should have, especially with the crap she pulled after this whole ordeal, and even the goddamn promotion she got after I left the company. Like, it's okay. Karma will eventually get to her, or she'll be stuck at that job forever, so win-win, I guess. Anyway, fast forward a bit to me being part-time and back on the night side. I guess Susan had this new habit of just ditching the attraction whenever she wanted, especially when I was there, and you know, she would be gone for hours at a time. She would even take some of her friends with her, and then we would be short-staffed. Yeah, still didn't lose her lead status, especially when she got called out multiple times, even by one of my union representatives that worked with me at the monorail. Honestly, it just wasn't worth it anymore because I wasn't really thinking about that anymore, and I was more focused on being a full-time parent to my kid and making these dumb videos. You can probably tell when I started uploading more frequently back in August of 2023, so just to give you an idea. This job wasn't worth it anymore, and going part-time really put it into perspective. Why deal with this high school drama anymore? Why deal with managers who don't give a piss about you? Why try to rework my schedule because the schedule was going against my seniority every single week? I went into a bit more detail about that in my first cast member video. That was a general overview of my time in attractions, but I sort of want to retell it for this episode specifically. So I do apologize for anyone that had to hear this story twice, but I felt like it was important to my lead story. You know, you always want to know what happens afterwards, I guess. Yes, I could have handled things a bit better as a lead, and even the aftermath that followed. I'm not a perfect person. I just know when I had more and more friends and family telling me that I didn't seem happy at this job, I knew it was time to make a hard decision. While there was a lot of good people I worked with, and they had mutual respect for me as well as I did them, it's just the shifts that I had to work and the negative people I had to work with really put it into perspective. When the negative outweighs the positives, it's time to move on. Now, before I move on to the conclusion, I just want to reiterate to please not harass or pester anyone working at the monorail or any of the attractions I worked at. I can tell you again that most of the people involved in my leadership time no longer work for the company or no longer in attractions or just no longer in that land. I know most of the night staff is completely new and probably don't even know who the hell I am, and that's becoming truer every day. I just wanted to give my perspective and let you know that even at a theme park dubbed the happiest place on earth, it has its own stupid ass freaking high school drama or whatever. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. This was also the last episode in my attractions arc, and the next episode will be the very last in the series. We are slowly approaching a year after leaving Disneyland, and that will be what the next episode's premise is. Basically, reflections from the past year. I will also be talking about some stuff that I didn't mention in my other episodes, such as like commuting and health problems and other stuff. I also wanted to do a Q&A section for the next video and questions regarding my time at the resort. So if you have any questions to ask about my previous job, now is the time. I won't be giving out any names or telling you how to break the attraction for anyone thinking they're funny. When I say questions, I mean like, what position was your favorite to work, or did you ever see a celebrity while working? Stuff like that, you know, you get the idea. It's also finally nice to move on to the next chapter of my life and not have to worry about working the mouse's playpen anymore. The changes that have happened, aside from their new contract, are for the worse and really makes me sad that the company is going down this road with its parks. I did talk about my personal opinions on the parks in my video essay series if you want to check that out as well, if you haven't already of course. I obviously didn't get to cover the recent expensive price hikes and such, but who's really even surprised about that anymore? That $400 Fast Pass? Yeah, they're hilarious. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode. I know this one was a bit more on the personal side and a bit longer than the rest. The next episode will release closer to the date that I actually left the company, so it won't be coming out at the beginning of the month like they usually have. Plus, I'll probably do a community post on my YouTube page about the Q&A as we get closer to that, if you don't want to leave a comment on this video for it. That is, if I even get any comments. Regardless, I thank you for your silent view, and I hope you have a good day wherever you're at. Bye.